join, but they can't actually get in to speak, but they can, they can interact and chat, but that's all they can do until a slot opens up.
Okay, got that. Subscribe to that, so I have that on my list.
Yeah, I'm probably, well, apart from the RSS feed, Dr. Price also, somebody set him up with a channel on Ustream.tv, and that's called the Bible Geek Show, I think, or Bible Geek. I'd have to look it up. I'll get the URL for you, but we set that up so that I would broadcast the MP3, and the way Ustream is set up, it's like you're supposed to be doing live shows. So instead of doing a live show, I would broadcast the MP3 as if it was a live show, and that would be recorded both to Ustream, and then I would upload it to the Bible Geek channel on YouTube, so that there would be actually a one-stop shop place on YouTube where everybody could get both the Hangout recordings and also the individual podcast recordings as YouTube videos. So I thought that would be convenient for people. So we got that set up today.
I missed the earlier part of what you said. Are you planning on doing this regularly, or will there be like set topics ahead of time so that we don't just go completely out in the blue?
I don't think we were planning on having definite days. Maybe we could do that. I was thinking perhaps after the podcast becomes available, like a day or two later, so that maybe we could discuss topics on the podcast. 'Cause a lot of people have their questions answered during the show. They sent it in 2 weeks ago, and he finally got it answered in a show. And then if there's a specific question or topic in the show, that way everybody would be familiar with something, that was recently on the podcast. Or we could just do topics if there's something people wanted to discuss.
Gotcha.
So is there anything anybody wants to discuss?
I'm trying to think of questions that I've had while listening to the podcast that I didn't send in. I know there are a few, but I can't recall exactly off the top of my head.
You sent one in today, didn't you?
Not me, no.
Dougie, we could talk about the Book of Daniel.
I know nothing about the Book of Daniel except there was a lion's den.
Oh, this was specific. Yeah, this was specifically the last piece in chapter 11.
Yeah, we can if everyone doesn't mind. I mean, it's obviously about the Bible if no one else has any other topics.
Is it about prophecies in the end times?
Not really. Yeah, that'd be great, Ruben.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt whoever that was.
Yeah, no, I was just saying that one of the reasons that people flock to Daniel is more specifically, well, some people, because it was able to predict things that happened in the future, even though most people agree that it was written post-fact. So after the fact.
Yeah, Rob and I have been discussing back and forth, trying to nail down a specific to-the-year dating of it. And I was thinking somewhere around 164, but Rob, you were saying 160, right?
Yeah, so I'm pretty confident now it is 160. And what Doug had done is Doug had sort of shown me this particular passage in Daniel, which he used to substantiate the 164 dating. And what I've since done is dug up something which I think is worthy of, and it's historic, which explains that that particular passage relates to something pre-164, which ultimately means that the whole text is about events that happened. Well, they certainly happened before 164 BC, but I'm still putting a date of 160 on there because the author uses things like the 2300 day reference, which is 6.3 months, which is really the tenure of the whole battle, the Maccabean revolt.
Yeah, could you go into that? Because I'm still kind of lost on exactly that part of it.
Yeah, I'd probably like to do it in a structured way, Doug. So maybe if we could just start with that passage that you offered up first, and
Okay.
we see if we can get some sort of consensus around whether there is, in fact, historical evidence that lines up nicely with that and happens before 164 BC. Once we have that discussion, then I'll put on the table the bits and pieces that I use to substantiate the 160 date. So we could do it in that order. If
So you want me to go with what the passages I was saying?
What I thought I might do, yeah, what I thought I might do, and again, anyone jump in if they've got an objection, but what I might do, start with the passage itself and just read that to the group, and then once that's done, then I'll read the historic record on Antiochus that I think maps nicely to that particular record and show that it all happens pre-164.
Okay, so do you want me to start with like 1140? Is that what you mean?
Is it 1136? I think it starts at, mate.
Yeah, yeah, we can start there.
Yeah. So do you want to read that or shall I?
Either way, doesn't matter.
All right. If you read it out to the group, then what I'll do is then I'll come and present the historical data that I think maps well to that.
Okay. I'll just go from the NASB. By the way, is everyone okay talking about this?
I think this is going to be over my head because I'm not into that part of the stuff. You know, start talking about prophecies and histories and matching up with prophecies and stuff. I'm not into that. Sorry.
Okay.
Y'all carry on. Y'all carry on though. I'm gonna pop on out and leave a spot for somebody else.
Well, I was gonna say we could do like a background thing before we start.
Oh no! Y'all go ahead.
Passages.
No, go ahead and do what you're gonna do. I was just saying I'm gonna go ahead and pop on out.
Okay.
So I don't want to interrupt what y'all got planned. So y'all take care now.
Well, we don't have anything really planned.
Well, apparently this is where it's going. So I'll catch y'all later.
All right. I'd like to make a comment just at this juncture, given that reaction, because it's a common reaction I find around, and it's not a critical one. It's just an observation, which I think is really well worth keeping in mind when we, you know, and the assumption being that we're all dedicated truth seekers, so we're really in the game for the true story. That's what it's all about. One of the things I've observed, and it's a common phenomenon, and that is that when we get to topics that really start to challenge the belief paradigms that are dearly held by some folk, there's a tendency to want to avoid that discussion. And that's probably all I really want to say at the moment. But I think it's something that you'll find just in common psychology, that when you confront belief paradigms that people hold, it is a common behaviour pattern. It's not being critical, but it's just an observation I think that's worthy of keeping in mind. And I'd encourage people that when you get that sort of feeling, at least hear the debate out before you move on.
Well, that may be true with most, but Heavy Hauler's just not into history stuff, so that's where he comes from.
Yes, it sounded like he just had a lack of interest in the topic rather than a.
I agree with Rob's assessment, mostly as far as most people go. But as far as Heavy Hauler, yeah, he's just not into history stuff, and I know that because of it's not just this specific topic, but a lot. It goes into like philosophy. He also is like, I have no idea, and I'm not even going to comment because I don't know. I don't even know where I would go with that.
Gotcha.
Yeah. I'm going to back it up too by an observation. So, just to introduce me to the group, my position is that I believe Jesus was a real person, and philosophically very sound, but I don't buy into the magic or the prophecy. And he had a really great saying, which sort of had my radar up on these sort of issues. It's saying number 2 in the Gospel of Thomas. So I hold the view that the Gospel of Thomas is true Jesus speak. And in saying 2, he says, when they find, well, he says, seek until you find. So he doesn't say believe. He says there's something to be known. But when they find, they will be disturbed. And my observation is that, when beliefs, dearly held beliefs are confronted, there is a period of disturbance, and there's a strong element in the human psyche. It's almost subconscious, which, it seems to pick up when there's a threat of any substance, and avoidance behaviours start to emerge. So it's just an observation. I mean, truth bears itself out in time, but I think it's worthy of comment. It seems evident in types of debate.
There's also the question that a lot of people don't understand about Dr. Price and the approach of the Bible Geek listeners group, and they might assume that we're going to be discussing, as he mentioned, prophecy and so forth, and they might be thinking that we're not taking a historical approach, but rather a religious approach.
Yeah, well, for me, it's all about facts and evidence and history, and that's where I personally come from.
Right, and that's the context that we're going to be speaking about. But if you're not familiar with where we're coming from up front, then you might be misled and not really understand what we're going to be doing.
Yeah. So, are you saying that? Are you saying to me that you're just genuine truth seekers? Is that's your position?
Yeah, but I think that aspects of what somebody might be thinking about is in terms of prophecy, being that we were Christians looking to see fulfilled prophecies in Daniel as related to Jesus and so forth as something religious, mystical, and that kind of stuff. I don't think that's where we're at.
Yeah, me neither. In fact, my position is that all prophecies are post-mortem. They're constructions for political reasons. Not
right, I agree with that.
Yeah. Okay, so could we perhaps go to Dougie, and away you go, mate, for those that are interested.
Sure. I mean, if no one else wants to discuss anything else, I don't want to hijack the.
Yeah, fair enough.
The topic.
No, go ahead.
It is the group's opening thing, so yeah, I agree.
Well, I'm just gonna say a couple background things so people can get the context. But and the Bible Geeks talked about this too, about dating the genre of apocalyptic writings, and in general, not specifically just in Daniel, but and correct me or jump in if I'm wrong. He talks about how usually the author will be writing from ostensibly from some time in the distant past, although he's usually actually writing way later on, and there's usually telltale signs in the text that that's the case, because you can see that as the prophecies go on, they're very, very accurate. Like in the case of Daniel, we'll see they're extremely. We're not going to probably go over the whole thing, but you can see that they're extremely accurate in regards to Antiochus Epiphanes and the Syrian Wars and Maccabeans and all that stuff. But I think it's true for like all apocalypses. Actually, I'm not sure about Revelation. I don't think that would apply to that. Anyway, and he says that you can see there'll come a certain point where the accuracy of the predictions stop being really accurate, and then they'll start going off into quote-unquote apocalyptic language, like in the case of Daniel, the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven, the heavenly host coming, saving Israel, all that sort of stuff. And he's saying that when we see that the prophecies kind of go off the rails, in other words, they're not recounting historical events, that we can use that point to date the probable time of writing. So everyone, I'm sure, has like heard the Bible Geek talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, mate.
Okay, so anyway, parts of Daniel that we were talking about were where I think it kind of goes off the rails. I think it's actually 40, but you want me to read from 36, 1136?
Yeah, so there's a subheading there, and it's a subtitle for the passage.
Yeah. So it says, "Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will." This is Daniel chapter 11, verse 36. Then the king will do as he. Sorry.
I was just going to say, read the heading so that they get a context of what its function is.
Of the chapter?
Chapter. Well, no, the verse heading like that. Sorry, the section heading.
Yeah, it's conflicts to come.
Okay, that's not what
verse? What verse are we on?
I'm looking at Daniel chapter 11, verse 36. I don't see a heading. There's a heading for the chapter 11, which is conflicts to come, but I don't see what you're referring to, Rob.
All right, just one sec. I'll get it for you.
Okay.
Well, sorry, I should have been prepared.
36.
I'll be there in 1 second, mate.
For all those who want a Hebrew Bible, here you go.
So the heading that I've got is the king who exalts himself, and then it runs into 36, and this is coming from NIV. Now I don't know whether that's a problem for people, but
it's not a huge deal. It goes into this, but I'll just start from 36 again because it goes straight into that. It says, "Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. He will show no regard for the gods of his fathers, or for the desire of women, nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. But instead he will honor a god of fortresses, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take action against the strongest of fortresses, and with the help of a foreign god, he will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and will cause them to rule over the many, and will parcel out land for a price." And now we're at verse 40. This is where I think it goes off the rails. "At the end time, the king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots and horsemen and with many ships, and he will enter countries, overflow them, and pass through. He will also enter the beautiful land, and many countries will fall. But these will be rescued out of his hand, Edom, Moab, and the foremost of the sons of Ammon. Then he will stretch out his hand against other countries, and the land of Egypt will not escape. But he will gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt. And Libyans and Ethiopians will follow at his heels. But rumors from the east and from the north will disturb him, and he will go forth with great wrath to destroy and annihilate many. He will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the seas and the beautiful holy mountain. Yet he will come to his end, and no one will help him."
Right. Thanks, Doug. Now, what I'm going to do, just to keep the momentum moving along, is I'm going to be referring to Wikipedia and the record that's in there from about Antiochus for Epiphanes. So I'll just copy and paste that link to the chat so that anyone that wants to keep track can just open that up. So,
just a quick question for reference. What two times are we arguing against? What's the time that people wish this was written in versus the time which you mentioned, which was 60 BC, is I'm assuming the time you're going for. But what's the timeline other people are arguing for?
Well, I'm saying that at verse 40, the quote-unquote predictions are true predictions, because I think they're wrong, especially the part about in verse 45 he says he will pitch the tents of his royal pavilion between the sea and the beautiful holy mountain, which is between, I'm assuming, and I think most people agree when they interpret this, is between Mount Zion and the Mediterranean, and it says he will die there and no one will help him. But from other records, we know that he died in Persia. And the reason that I'm arguing for a date of 164 is if he had been writing, say, in 160, historically Antiochus would have been dead already, and presumably the author maybe should have known that he actually didn't die in Palestine but died in Persia. So it makes you wonder, like, why would he put that in there if he was writing post the death of Antiochus? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. How could he make a mistake? Though you could find, or if that's true, what you'll find most likely, if it was taken beyond that, is you'll find someone trying to correct that, trying to make up why this still fits later on in probably the next chapter.
All right. So let's just consider. We've just read Daniel 11:36 through 45. Now let's have a look at what Wikipedia says about Antiochus. He lived 215 BC through to 164, and this is where he meets his maker. He was a great king of the Seleucid Empire from 175 BC until his death in 164. He was the son of Antiochus III the Great. His original name was Mithridates. He assumed the name Antiochus after he ascended to the throne. I'm going to skip through some stuff here and just get to his rise of power, because there's some interesting things that happen here. Now, this is where Reuven has some difficulties, because basically my argument ends up concluding that we don't really have the folks of Judea liberating themselves. It's just a handover from one empire to another. So let's talk about that. As the son and the potential successor of King Antiochus III, Antiochus becomes a political hostage of the Roman Republic, and this occurs in 188 BC. So we already see that Rome has some influence, and significant influence, in the region, and they start a practice that they actually carry out through most of that early history. It's very evident that the Romans held the client king's children, and they held them for one, as a political hostage. And so this behaviour is evident from 180 BC. So we can see the muscle of Rome already dominating, or it's a very large presence in the region, 188 BC. When his older brother Seleucus IV followed his father onto the throne in 187 BC, Antiochus was released in exchange for his nephew Demetrius I Soter, the son of and heir to Seleucus. After King Seleucus was assassinated by Heliodorus, a usurper, in 175 BC, Antiochus in turn ousted him. Since Seleucus' legitimate heir Demetrius I Soter was still a hostage in Rome, Antiochus, with the help of King Eumenes II of Pergamum, seized the throne for himself. So Antiochus stepped up, and he's sort of thumbing it up to the Romans a little, but subtly. Now, when we come along to the next part, this is the story. So we're going to be reading the section on the 6th Syrian War. This is the wars against Egypt, and they occur when Antiochus is in power. So, it's this story that I think maps nicely to the passage that Doug just read out. So let me read it to you. When the guardians of King Ptolemy, 6, I think it is, V1, 6 of Egypt, demanded the return of Coal Syria, In 170 BC, when Antiochus is the ruler of the Seleucid Empire, Antiochus launches a preemptive strike against Egypt. So we do, in fact, prior to 164 BC, have this event where Antiochus himself, who I think is the person that's being spoken of in Daniel, it does actually take on Egypt. He conquering all but Alexandria and capturing King Ptolemy. To avoid alarming Rome, because you've got to, if you look at the larger picture, what you see here is that if Antiochus successfully takes over Egypt, his empire grows to a size that would be very alarming to Rome, and they would very readily see that as a major incident and a major threat. So to avoid alarming Rome, Antiochus allowed Ptolemy VI to continue ruling as a puppet king. Upon Antiochus's withdrawal, the city of Alexandria chose a new king, but you've got to remember that Antiochus is the ruler at the moment. The rest are puppets. One of Ptolemy's brothers, also named Ptolemy, this is Ptolemy VIII Euergetes. Instead of fighting a civil war, the Ptolemy brothers agreed to rule Egypt jointly, and I think this is this division of land that might be referenced in the thing. But it gets a little bit more interesting. So in 168 BC, Antiochus leads a second attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet. So now we've got this reference to the ships. The ships are involved. And he sends the fleet to capture Cyprus. Before reaching Alexandria, his path was blocked by a single old Roman ambassador named Gaius Populus Laenus, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate. So Rome's very anxious about these affairs, and they really lay the law down. So the senator directs Antiochus to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus, or consider themselves in a state of war with the Roman public. Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council. So Antiochus is trying to get away from that situation, regroup, and then rally to take Rome on. But whereupon the Roman envoy draws a very famous line in the sand around Antiochus and says, "Before you cross this circle, I want you to give me a reply for the Roman Senate," implying that Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of the circle without committing to leave Egypt immediately. So Rome's agenda at 168 BC is to say, go home. And it's when he returns home that we see shortly after, in 167 BC, the beginning of what's known historically as the Maccabean Revolt. But I'm going to suggest that and we have evidence of a relationship between the Jewish faction, if you like, or the Maccabees. In 161 BC, there's a famous and first treaty between Rome and, it's called the Roman-Jewish Treaty in 161 BC. But I think you'll find the truth of the matter is that Rome, because of the threat that Antiochus was representing to them, they actually engineered this what's known as the Maccabean Revolt, and were party to it. And at the end of the Maccabean Revolt, 160 BC, is when someone sat down, as they do after these conflicts. If you look at the larger historical picture, they sat down and authored the book of Daniel at that point. And I'll break now for probably a bit of discussion, but what I'd like to offer next is why I think the dating of the book of Daniel is clearly 161 BC, and that all of the story in the book of Daniel is about affairs leading up to, but not past 160 BC.
Okay, so can I jump in?
Yeah, mate, go.
I like what you're saying. The only issue I'm having with it, and I could be wrong, it's just my interpretation, is that I think, especially verse 43, is saying that why I don't think it applies to that is because my reading he's saying that, well, and actually from 42, he's saying that he will completely conquer Egypt. It says Egypt will not escape. He'll gain control over the hidden treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. And then it goes on to say, and the Libyans and Ethiopians even will follow at his heels, meaning that he's also going to go on to conquer Libya and Ethiopia, not just Egypt, which is definitely. I mean, he got turned around by Popilius before he even finished conquering Egypt. There's no way he conquered Ethiopia and Libya also.
But Doug, 1 second. That turnaround occurred in 168 BC, but if you go back a little prior to that, it clearly says that Antiochus in 170 BC did take over that region and installed a puppet king because he was concerned about Rome getting anxious about the growth of his empire. So there was a point where Antiochus really was the ruler for all intensive purposes.
Of Libya and Ethiopia?
It doesn't say that here, so I don't know, but certainly that he's owning whatever the Ptolemies owned, because he's owning the Ptolemies outright. So I guess we'd have to understand what coverage the Ptolemies had.
Yeah, I mean, it's important. I mean, if there's some evidence that he, at that time, had basically control over Libya and Ethiopia somehow, then that obviously I think that would match up with the verse in Daniel. But if he didn't, then there's a problem, I think. So, yeah, we'll have to look further into that.
Well, there is another bit of evidence that I'm going to produce in a minute, which sort of says that the author knew that events would finish specifically on 160 BC when things are tidied up. So that's still to come.
Okay.
So, I mean, if no one's discussing anything at the moment, I'll probably just go straight into that because that adds value to the proposition I'm sort of putting forward.
Let's see if anyone else has. Does anyone else have any other topics they want to discuss or questions about what we've been talking about or anything?
Well, I think, as you said, Doug, verse 43, I think you can clearly say that he was aware of events in Egypt, at least up to some point. But yeah, I'd be interested in hearing Rob's further discussion, because it sounds like that's where, between 43 and 44 is where he goes astray, as you mentioned earlier. So I'm interested to hear what Rob has to say on that.
Okay.
Okay, so when you look at, I'm just going to take, when you look at the full story in Daniel, you find some really interesting dates. The first one occurs in 8. I'll just get the verse to save you guys hunting it down, but it's a really important one. And then there's a passage on the 77. So I'm going to discuss both of those and offer some evidence that the author that wrote this particular text had the full 7 years in his mind, the full 7-year battle, which starts in 167 and ends in 160.
You're saying he knew about the entire stretch of the Maccabean revolt. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
So what I've done there is I've just posted in the chat window, and I'll read it to you. It's verse, it comes from Daniel 8. It's verse, chapter 8, verse 14. So 8:14, for those that want to look it up. It says, he said to me, and this is coming from an alleged vision, which I don't buy. He said to me, it will take 2,300 evenings, or 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary will be reconsecrated. So this is when things are put back on an even keel. Now, largely, most people, or from a scholarly perspective, most people, accept that it's about Antiochus and about this conflict known as the Maccabean revolt, and the story from Nebuchadnezzar right up to that particular period. If you actually do the math on 2,300 evenings and mornings, you'll find that it comes in and I'm probably talking about our calendar now, the 365 one, because calendars are really also important in terms of the evidence. I'll explain that in a second. But the 2300 evenings, it comes in at 6.3 years. And so if we can get a specific starting and end date, you'll probably find that that's very close to the Maccabean Revolt period.
Well, too, if you do the 2300 days, it also comes out. Yeah, I mean, it's based. I think that's the 77. Like, it comes out to almost 77 exactly months.
Yeah. So now let's go to the last chapter of Daniel, and we'll go to chapter 12.
Just let me interrupt you real quick. John is doing a really helpful thing. He's bringing up the relevant text for everyone. So if you click on him, you can see the text.
All right, thanks, John. Much appreciated. So if we go to Daniel 12, it's the end times passage, and right towards the end of it, it says, "From the time that the daily sacrifice is abolished and the abomination that causes desolation is set up, there will be 1,290 days." Now, if you do the math on that, it's basically 3.5 years, which just happens to coincide with the timing of the event from 167 to the passing of Antiochus. That's my good buddy Brandon. But then it goes on to say, oddly, "Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end of the 1335 days." So there's a gap of 45 days that has some form of significance. And I suspect that may have something to do with the wounding of Antiochus to his ultimate death, perhaps. And that may help us, might give us some clue on, the Babylon passing in Babylon. And Doug, I haven't found any literature on that, so I'm curious if you've got anything of substance on that, the historical death
of Antiochus.
Yeah.
There's some in Second Maccabees that talks about it, and I think Reuven had another source that he linked me a while ago, although I think I forgot to bookmark it.
Yeah.
He can probably tell us right now, though.
So let's, he's certainly brilliant. Now, let's go back to the passage which I think is really key, and it's a really important one. That's the 77s. Now, the 77s, for those, and I've got a question for the group on this one. So the 77s, which I think is 9. Yeah. So it's in John. It's in chapter 9, and it's towards the bottom. The 77s uses a different form of calendar. So this is where the calendar conversation becomes really important. And this all ties in with the banning of the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees, them being marked as apocrypha. I hold the view that they weren't apocrypha at all at the time. They were part of the whole set that was contrived in 161 BC to build a story to re-establish the old Persian corrupted Judaism, and end this threat from the Greek traditions that Antiochus was backing. So the Book of Jubilees is really interesting because it gives us the actual calendar, or the new form of dating that they tried to introduce for long run calendar events. So it's called a Jubilee. And what a Jubilee is a period of 49 years. 49 years? 7 sevens are 49? 49 years. And so if I say to you 2 Jubilees, I'm talking about a period of time that runs 98 years. And within a Jubilee, so we have things like months, years, minutes. That's how we divide time slices. What they were trying to do here was extend that so that they could probably express and in fact, actually, if you read the Book of Enoch, you can see how they use this calendaring system, or this expression of time system, for long-run periods. And that talks to another common phenomenon you see with the corruption of the biblical text. You get this phenomenon where they will endeavour to rewrite history. It's part of the pattern. They did it with the Book of Kings, that was Cyrus. They're now doing it with the Maccabees, and we see it happen again with the works of Josephus. When they're rewriting these texts, they rewrite the history as well. It's a parallel exercise. So, and the Book of Enoch was that attempt to redress the history, and interestingly, they tried to introduce a new calendar system. Right, that's also part of that particular story. But for now, let's just focus on the 77s. So you had this concept of a jubilee being 49 years, so that bang, you can encapsulate larger slices of time. You then got this secondary element called a 7. A 7, 1 7 represented 7 years. And that's clearly evident in...
Hi.
Hello, how are you? You can kiss me, darling.
Bye.
See you later. Yeah, so you've got a jubilee, a 7, and then a year. That's the way that works. And you know, if anyone doubts that, just go and read the Book of Jubilees, and you'll find that's exactly how it works. So now let's use that knowledge to look at the passage 77 and see if we can't use it to determine what they're talking about when they talk about a period of 62 sevens, a period of 1 7, and in the middle of 1 7. What does that all mean? So I'll ask a question of the group. So do you want me to read the full 77's passage? It's not a large section, but just for context, it might be useful if I just read the passage.
I don't mind.
Okay. Well, no one else is objecting, so I'll read it. While I was speaking and praying, confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and making my request to the Lord my God for his holy will. Now, I just want to stop there for a minute. This is a common theme, and this is the massive injustice done to the true Israelites. We see it begin in earnest with Cyrus the Great, and it is the injustice done to Israel. They frame the Israelites as guilty in the eyes of their God, where no guilt exists, right? And that was part of the ploy. What was happening here was that the Pharisee priesthood were framing again and restating the guilt upon the innocent people of Israel, and they were blaming them for drifting away from what is a rather, well, it's not a spiritually sound religion, at least the one that came out of Cyrus's corruption. Before that, it's sound, right? So the Torah is very sound, but after that, it's not. So this is a common pattern, right? So these people, these authors, are cursing basically the people of Israel and blaming it on them as a means to get them to come back in under the authority of the corrupt Judaism. So while I was still in prayer, Gabriel, right? So this is really important too, because I'm saying that Gabriel is a work of fiction, and when you know the Book of Enoch, and you know a little bit about Zoroastrian and how Zoroaster was imaged with 6 petitions in his wings, 3 each side, and you look at Enoch, you know that the author was actually casting that image of Zoroaster into this form of an angel. And that's quite powerful, because this does a lot of damage to the Islam platform, if that were true, because we know very well that Muhammad tried to base his religion on the concept of Gabriel being a real entity. But I'm saying, no, that's not true at all. So whilst I was still impaired, Gabriel, the man I'd seen in the earlier vision, came to me in swift flight. So this is the wing connection back to Zoroaster. about the time of the evening sacrifice. He instructed me and said to me, Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding. As soon as you begin to pray, an answer was given, which I can come to tell you, for you are highly esteemed. Therefore consider the message and understand the vision. 77s. Now 77s, I haven't gone matching this back that way, because I don't really feel I need to, but there will be something relevant to that particular start date. And I'll give you an anchor date in a minute, but I'll anchor it on the 62 sevens. So 72 sevens are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness. And of course, they're casting Antiochus as the wicked one, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. Know and understand this. From the issue of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the ruler, comes. Now, the Anointed One, if you go back to the book of Isaiah, is Cyrus the Great. There will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. Now, if we go back to the historical date when Nebuchadnezzar took the Jewish folks away from their native land and took them to Babylon, that particular date is 597, I think, BC. Let me just get that specific date. Might be 5. Well, just go here and go to that one. Whoops, stop it.
Are you hungry, baby?
Sorry, I won't be long. So if I've got it now. So historically, Nebuchadnezzar II takes Jerusalem 597 BC. Right, so that's the historic version. In the text of Daniel, we find that Daniel and his 3 colleagues undergo 3 years of training. So there's something important about those 3 years of training in Babylon. And that training leaves them 10 times wiser than anyone else in Babylon. So there's a clear effort in the text. And, 10 times wiser is not really anything substantially that we could validate in science or anything, but it's important to the author to make this point that over a stretch of 3 years, it's proven that Daniel and his 3 Jewish colleagues are much more superior than Babylon. So that to me is saying that the author's intent is to really wipe away the value or the wisdoms of Babylon and replace them. So that puts us at 594 BC. 62 sevens, if you work them out, so that's 62 times 7, because they're sevens, not jubilees. That gives us a sum total of 434 years. If we deduct that 434 years away from 594, we actually end up at 160 BC. Let's go back to the passage now. So after 62 sevens, if we use as an anchor point the time that Nebuchadnezzar takes the Jewish people into captivity, we end up at 160 BC. After the 62 sevens, the passage continues, the Anointed One will be cut off and will have nothing. So there's a strange play on the Anointed One being destroyed here. So it's as if they're sort of saying that the Anointed One was Antiochus, perhaps. The people of the ruler will come, will destroy the city and the sanctuary. So that was what Antiochus, I think, did. At the end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. So that's the war, because the war raged 7 years. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of the temple, so wings come into it again, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is, the creed is poured out on him, and that's going back to Antiochus, I think, in the middle there where he dies. So, Doug, that's my, this reference to timings. So for if my conclusions are correct, the author then would have to know the full 7-year event, have to be conscious of it. And I was just going to say, when we offer an explanation for your counter before, the only anomaly we're left with is how do we explain Antiochus dying in Babylon?
I had a question. Weren't you getting the other part about the sevens from, what was it, from Jubilee?
Yeah, the Book of Jubilees.
So are you saying that Daniel also wrote Jubilee, and that's how he would have known?
Whoever wrote the Book of Daniel is also responsible for putting together the Book of Enoch, because the Book of Enoch was the historic retelling and reframing of things, and it was an attempt to introduce, I think they were going from solar to lunar calendar. There was an attempt to change calendars in the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Jubilees, if you look at that explains this calculation system. Well, it's just a method, right, of expressing time. Instead of using, like we do, years, months, and days, they wanted to add on top of that a jubilee, which was a grouping of 49 years, and a thing called a 7, which was a 7-year period.
Okay, yeah. See, I don't know what the scholarship says about authorship of Jubilees and Enoch and all that. Maybe Reuven probably knows more about that than I do. So I'm not sure. You could be right. I haven't even looked into that. So, but I was just going strictly off of what was written in Daniel. So, but if there's good evidence that whoever wrote Daniel, even if it was necessarily one person, also wrote Jubilees and Enoch, etc., then yeah, I could see a connection there. But like I said, I'd want to, like, for example, is the writing style similar in Jubilees in Hebrew? I'm not aware of that. Like, I'd have to look into all that stuff. And then we also have to establish that the Ptolemies were in control of Libya and Ethiopia, and that Antiochus eventually got control of them as well. Because remember, that's in that verse of Daniel, so we would need to still establish that also.
Yeah, I understand that, but from my research perspective, that led to my book. I covered the 900-year stretch, and I deliberately chose not to answer every question. I wanted the bigger picture, and now that I have that bigger picture, the more deeper I dig, the more substance I'm able to bring to the fore to back the story. So if you look at the bigger picture, right, it gives the motive and the cause. So what we're saying here is, or what I'm saying is that the Persian Empire took over Jerusalem as a client, made them a client kingdom. They installed their own people. They rewrote the religion, exactly what they did to the Babylonians, and we have that's evident on the Cyrus cylinder. They rewrote the history, the Book of Kings. That's why we have an anomaly over the 10 tribes of the missing 10 tribes, and that then explains the omission of the Battle of Qarqar, Qar. So when you look at this whole story as empires politicizing the true teachings, the wisdoms, it makes a lot more sense. And from that perspective, if you then come forward to the Book of Daniel and the threat that would have been evident to the empires from the Greek traditions and to the empires of Persia and Rome for their tie to these belief traditions, it makes sense that, particularly when you see the backstory and you see Rome so heavily involved, right? They are a major player. They're no small fry. I mean, owning the king's child and having him held, that says very much about how much weight Rome had in that particular area at the time. And then when you come forward to the Hasmoneans and their sort of dynasty, you have a look at the backstory there, you find that their children are kept in Rome. You know, it tells a very clear story, I think, that from that, you know, so it's like it is what it is. It's academic then to fill the gaps in. And also, I heard you mention the Book of Revelations. Well, if you actually have a look, well, I found a very interesting passage which came from the Talmud, which ties into the Bar Kokhba revolt. And the Bar Kokhba revolt was the third of three wars between, or so-called wars between Rome and the Jewish people. In that, it actually talks about the blood going up to the nostrils, which is what's actually written in the Book of Revelation. So if you put a dating of the Book of Revelations later than 136 AD, and probably at the hand of someone like Ignatius or Irenaeus, one of those guys, then, you know, you can then put Pompeii in there, and then you can start to find the historical context that they were writing Revelations around. Same story again. It's post-mortem, and therefore we can now move to explain all prophecy from Isaiah through to Revelations, and show how it's really stories contrived around history and presented as if it were prophecy. Ezekiel's another one, you know, sort of thing. So from that bigger picture perspective, it just makes sense that this is what these people are up to.
Rob, I have a question on Daniel. Are you saying that as opposed to the traditional assigning of dates as it's being given in Daniel, where they're talking, usually the people are saying that weeks equals, you know, weeks of years, you're saying that that should be looked at as far as the calculational system of dates based on jubilees and that type?
Yes, correct. Absolutely. That's exactly what it is. You know, 1/7, 1/7 based on the Jubilees, the Book of Jubilees calendar or calculation method, or no, it's not even a calculation method, it's expression of time method. 1/7 is 7 years. Half of that is 3.5 years. So that's exactly what it represents.
Well, I never heard of that before. That's very interesting.
Oh, I'm an interesting dude, mate, but I tell you, it's a hard discussion to have. But it goes back to, you know, people's positions and beliefs and that. John, I'm quite happy to share, and you can have a free copy of my bigger picture story if you want to have a look at it at some point. And I think, John, I've shared with you my interpretation of the Jesus, you know, the Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, those sayings. Sorry, Reuben. Reuben sort of had enough of me talking about the Gospel of Thomas. But I mean, I think scholarship haven't really looked at what the man said, and there's, because that was the journey for me. I actually really took a lot of time to try and work out, you know, because he does say it's knowable. So I thought, well, all right, if you're going to say that, it's got to be knowable. So I took the time to read it, and it is indeed, it's very valid and very knowable, and that was the thing that led to the inquiry into the history and the backstory to try and piece it together.
Well, we should definitely have a hangout on Thomas, I think.
Oh yeah, I'd love to do that. And I mean, your project, the work that you're about, it is probably something that's well overdue. You know, trying to say, well, what is Q source? I mean, everyone talks about it, but where's that attempt to reconstruct it? Well, I wish you all the success, but I'll say at the end of it, you'll have something that looks very similar to the Gospel of Thomas. That's my assumption.
Yeah, well, if you go over the literature, it's just about every scholar has a version of Q. So
Yeah.
it's quite an open question, and it's an interesting debate. And I would not rule out what Rob's theory is, but I would say that from my studies, there's a lot of objections to Thomas being Q. I would say that there was a Q source that was influencing Thomas, influencing the Gospels and so forth, but I don't think you can necessarily say that Thomas was Q. It could be close. I mean, even the Jesus Seminar had several sayings which they marked as read, being in their system that it was an authentic Jesus saying related to the synoptics. So it's a very interesting question.
Well, it's further compounded, John. I mean, when you look at my book, I put a link there, right? So that's free. You can just jump in and have a look if you want to. But
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Although, if you're speaking to other people, if you think it's worth the read, get them to bloody pay for it, because otherwise I've got to go back to work and I can't finish my second book. But if you look at the longest story, right? Because I'm really basically saying candidly that the true wisdom has been politicized over time and used for political agenda. Well, I finished my story and was convinced that that was the case up to 325 AD, but time marches on. It doesn't stop at 325 AD. So I've actually began the effort of looking at what's happened beyond that time, and I've got to say the story continues. Now, if that's true, and if we're talking about some of the most powerful forces politically and economically on the planet, there's a vested interest for them, and this is where we'll start to hear the cries of conspiracy. But if that were true, then it would come as no surprise that there will be people that will argue the counter position, and they have the resources to do it. And I was reminded when I was looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls effort and all of the controversy that surrounded that the Rothschilds actually set up camp in there, and they were the major funders of one of the universities that owned a lot of the internalized effort on it. So, there's a much more interesting story when we start moving forward from 325 towards our current area, to be told, I think. But the one thing is, it does all fit together as far as, well, so far I haven't found anything that sort of says that religions haven't been politicized and used for power in a big way.
And also addressing the issue that you brought up about the content of, say, like Thomas or whatever you might want to examine. There's nothing wrong with the philosophy, that it's full of content that speaks to people even today, maybe more so today than it did to Orthodox Christianity over the years, and which is probably why they buried the darn thing. But I have no argument with what someone might make out of the content of the book and what it says to them and what meanings they have for human existence and so forth. It's just that my focus has been on the scholarly examination of the provenance of this stuff and where it comes from and what are the interrelationships textually and other forms. So
Yeah, well,
we're just on different approaches pages. We're not in conflict or anything. We're just looking at it from two different perspectives, I suppose.
Oh yeah. I mean, but see, I've had to mature along the journey as well, because I sort of found a position which I think comes with a mountain of evidence, but to have that discussion and debate can be very frustrating. People have, views, and to try and enter into that discussion, particularly when, Reuben sort of showed it to us a moment ago, people get tired of certain topics very easily, and they don't want to open up. So it becomes a very difficult discussion to have. And beyond that, it becomes secondarily really difficult because it challenges to the core a lot of what we have accepted over time. But here's the thing that's really interesting, right? And this is where we differ, right? I came at it from the point of my journey went this way. Firstly, it was the Rwandan massacre that got me thinking, well, what the hell's going on in this world? How do 800,000 families basically massacre each other? How is that damn possible? And that's where the journey started. And then the next step was coming across the Gospel of Thomas and thinking that, well, it's only a short read. He says it's all to be knowable. Why does the church so strongly object to including this stuff? And when I read it, and this is the thing, mate, and this is what you were saying, right? It connects to us, the human story. It does, and it explains us extremely well. It explains the human story very, very well, and it was just a natural progression to try and understand, well, why doesn't it get airplay? Why isn't this out in the public domain? Because as soon as I saw the value in it, I thought, well, shit, this will get Islam and Christianity on the same page, and Judaism for that matter, because the truth of the story, as it turns out, is that Jesus, well, my truth anyway, my truth is that Jesus was an Essene who practiced the Nazarite tradition, and there's your hook back to the Torah. So now you've got Judaism and Christianity all hovering around this one central person who seems to have been very accurate, not in giving us a description of what a human is and why we have difficulties in our life.
Yeah, and whether it goes back to an authentic Jesus or, it's Q or not, those are all academic questions because, if I conceded that Thomas was Q or you conceded that it wasn't or whatever, it really makes no difference as far as the content of it, as you said. There's something there that's relatable and usable for human beings,
Yeah, but that in itself is very, very intriguing because of this very salient point. If it does turn out to map extremely well, because it's that wisdom phenomenon, where you and I and people in Israel or people in Africa can read a certain Rumi, I think it is, Rumi text and say, wow, that's very insightful. Well, if Jesus' text, the Gospel of Thomas, fits into that genre, right, that it speaks the universal language, then comes a very interesting question. Do we have any evidence that it was written any earlier, those words in that structure, were they written any earlier than 1st century AD? If we cannot find any structure, then we have to start to agree that these wisdoms that we recognize today as valid belong to someone in 1st century Judea. And that's very interesting. So, only one person in history said E equals, or originated E equals MC squared, and this was an argument I was having with the guys the other night, Dougie. I don't know whether you were a party to that, but, to me, it's further substance of the existence of the man.
I would say that when it's related to somebody historical, it does carry a lot more weight. Somebody that has their foot in various Abrahamic faiths could be like a unifying force. Is that kind of what you're getting at?
Well, that's its power at the end of the day, because if you look at the interesting thing about Islam is that they hold this view, and I think it may well have some founding in it, right? Because we know that there's a guy called Abdullah. There's a rabbi involved in the early construction of, and I've got a theory about that too. But there's a rabbi involved in the early birth of Islam, and what the Islam folks say is that Torah is valid, and my research seems to support that. But also we find that they honour a gospel of Jesus, right? Now, interestingly, there's 114 sayings, and I can't find any correlating thing, but it's just an interesting anomaly that there's 114 sayings in the Gospel of Thomas, and the Quran is made up of 114 chapters or verses or whatever, chapters, I suppose. And they honour a thing called the Injil. So I thought, wow, that's interesting, because Islam then pays respect and homage to Jesus. Now, if we can sort of flush out the real Jesus message, and it turns out to be valid philosophically, well, then we've got a basis of a coming together, around the figure Jesus. And I think that's quite powerful, and particularly, in the climate that we have now, where division is the thing that's tearing us apart, when we really needed an undivided attention on things like climate change and economics and that, and couldn't come at a better time if it were true.
Yeah, I read that website that you had pointed to about the Injil, and I found it very intriguing. There was quite a bit of correspondence. Of course, this could be a topic for another hangout, but there is, quite a few theories that believe that Islam started through various Christian heretical groups on the fringes of empire that probably had access to things like the Gospel of Thomas and other Gnostic writings. So a lot of that Gnosticism was the impetus for Islam.
Oh, yeah. I mean, and probably on a positive note, we have the groundings of some really good discussions to be had over a serious time. Because there's like I'm skimming across the top like I usually do, but yeah, it'd be interesting to dig a bit deeper and see what we could flush out.
Unfortunately, that website only went into Surah number 2 and said it was a work in progress. So it'd be interesting to see. Because I'm no Islamic scholar, so I can't sit down and say, okay, the next surah corresponds to this Thomas saying. I just don't think I have enough background in Islam to make that kind of determination. So I'm really looking forward to that guy doing more work anyway.
Yeah, although I don't think, because I'm got a little bit of an insight into the Quran, and I don't think that his strategy is right. I don't think he's correct. The philosophies, as you said, the early Gnostic philosophies certainly flavour the Quran, because it does have some, it does have the true story woven through it. But I think it's more likely that when that rabbi got involved, it was whatever was going on, it was politicized deliberately, because if you actually look back at the historic record, and there's a guy called Dr. Bill Warner, I think his name is, he's got a site called Political Islam. He's got a great little video that maps the fighting between Islam and Christianity right through to about 1000 AD. And if you just look at those little dots where all the conflict was occurring, you can see it's like a birth, a fire from Arabia, and just it travels right all the way and concentrates in Spain. So, I personally, I think what's happening is that the Persian influences over Judea are governing the birth of Islam and seeking revenge against the Romans. I know that's a bit of a stretch, but that's my theory at the moment.
Well, my gut feeling was, and since I'm no Islamic scholar, is that it seems as though there might have been, because there's quite a bit of violence, warfare, and so forth in the Quran and in the known history of Islam, that there was a warlord type kind of guy to whom these stories were accrued, that they made him into a prophet for political reasons in order to give more clout to this ideology that was developed. But the actual historical Muhammad was in no way as he's depicted.
Oh, yeah, there's some very dubious qualities around that individual, very dubious. But anyway, that's you get into all sorts of fluff there. But the good news is, and this is why I like the story, because it's almost like it's a fairy tale. It has a happy ending. It has the potential for a good ending, where we depoliticize the spiritual story and end up with a common collection of wisdoms that really do give us some beneficial guidance on how to walk the life walk, and how to and respect our neighbours. And here's another example of something that really frustrates the daylights out of me. We have this situation, and I don't like it happening, where that plane was brought down, but our political leaders and everyone makes an outcry about the injustice and the death of those people. But where's that same voice and that same disgust when it's an Israeli or an Arab child, or a child in Baghdad or Afghanistan, or where's that same outcry when Syria was attacked by the chemical weapons and all the kids that got killed there? There's just a world of difference, and I think I know why, but what upsets me is that we as a group of people, we don't call that out for what it is, and we don't stand up for the kids in Israel and the kids in Palestine that are being killed. And it's all political as far as I can tell. And I think most people would sense that, yes, this is political, You know what I mean? It's annoying, bloody annoying.
Yeah.
Their kids know better or worse than our own kids, yet we allow these travesties of injustice to go on.
That Sufi Q that I had mentioned to you, Rob, I was going through a few more other sources that Dr. Price apparently didn't consider, and guess how many sayings I ended up with? 114. Coincidence?
Really?
Yes.
Oh. More power. You go, man. That's brilliant. Very good. So
I was hitting for that number. It just coincidentally actually worked out that way. I was trying, if I came up with more than 114, I don't know what I would have done, but I was able to scrounge together a few more and bring the total up to 114.
So are they Sufi sayings that underneath that? Yeah.
Yeah, there's multiple sources. The main source that Dr. Price used was El Ghazari, I believe his name was, and he had a collection of maybe 80 some altogether. And then in Deconstructing Jesus, he brought in most of those. He left out a few, but he also brought in a few additional ones from other sources that are referenced in the book. And I went and found a few other books that were also dealing with different aspects of Islam, and one of the sections was called The Aesthetic Jesus, and in that I found a few more sayings that Dr. Price had not considered from other guys, so I threw those in there too.
Wow, that's going to be a really interesting work, mate. When you should. So is that going to be your work effort? Something that you publish,
I think I've been able to talk Dr. Price into considering to publish this new version. It's just that now there's quite a few sayings that have no commentary, that they're just sayings, and a lot of them I don't even feel confident enough to be able to say anything scholarly about, being an armchair scholar and amateur. But I was going to present them to Dr. Price, and I sent him the latest version. And if he wants to do some additional work and get back into that mode, we will go ahead and publish it then.
Yeah, well, what I can do, and I'm not blowing my own trumpet here, well, I am, I guess, but I can tell you definitively if something's political or if it's true Jesus speak, if you want, for want of a better word. So if you ever want my input or my assessment on any of the wisdoms and an interpretation, if you find them foggy or whatever, I might be able to offer you some assistance, and I'd be happy to do that if that's something that you're interested in.
We'll see how it
And
works out.
yeah, well, that's right. Yeah. I mean, everyone's got to make their living, I suppose. But no,
Well,
more power.
I'm going to do it gratis. I stopped charging Dr. Price anything for doing stuff for him a long time ago.
Well, unfortunately, mate, I've got to make a living. So
Yeah, to me, it's like if you can see my screen, it would be the title page of it, and I'm just in it for the byline.
well, I mean, if you can somehow establish some sort of connection back to the Gospel of Thomas, that would be extremely powerful stuff.
Yeah, you can see in the table of contents, there's quite a few, like Sufi Q. We call it that. That's just a nickname, but this would be Sufi Q saying for. Let's take a look at it. It says, Jesus said, "Be in the middle, but walk on one side." And then there's an affinity, or at least some kind of relationship with Thomas saying 42, which would be that I quote here says, "Jesus says, become passers-by." That's the extent of the saying. So you could see that there is some kind of relationship. Exactly what that is, I'm not qualified to say.
Well, I kind of think I am. Well, no one, probably, I'm not acknowledged by anyone, but I think I can. At least, well, I understand all of the 114 very clearly. And so,
See, to me, that Proverbs seems way more, way closer to the Thomas saying.
That's what I was thinking.
I'm sorry, the Sufi thing.
Yeah, this whole paragraph, I wrote this. This was like my attempt to add some commentary to see how it comes out. So everything here, its relation to Thomas saying 42 and its relation to Proverbs, that was based on my research. Whether it's valid or not, I threw that in there. And if Dr. Price says, "Oh, that's bullshit," we'll cut that out. Or something, whatever. That's fine with me. But that's just what I came up with.
Yeah.
can I just read it for a second? Because I'm sorry, I was busy just grabbing a thing. I'll just give you a commentary. So Jesus said, "Be in the middle, but walk on one side." What's that? Is that a Sufi saying, right? That first one?
It's from a guy. Oops. It's from a book by a guy named by Dowie, and it's called the Commentary on Quran. And then it says it was from Deconstructing Jesus that I got it from.
Yeah. So the passers-by comment, what that's about is it's wise in life to allow life to pass you by, right? It's about the life story is not one, or the meaning in life is not, it's not held intellectually, right? You can try, but you're wasting your time. You can go on intellectually trying to nut things out. Where you get your understanding and your meaning in life is through the experience itself. So to say be in the middle means to be aware of both. So there's a duality in life, and by saying walk on the one side, he's saying go with the God or the good wolf, or the Cherokee saying the good wolf, back that side. That's the one that you stay on. So there's certainly a correlation, I think. So let's see what else it says compared to the Septuagint translation. Turn not aside to the right hand nor to the left, but turn away thy foot from an evil way. For God knows the ways on the right hand. And that's interesting, but those on the left are crooked. And that's where that's really interesting, that right and left phenomenon. The right in our brains, right? And I got this from a neuroscientist, Jill Bolte Taylor, right? She had a stroke, and the stroke was on her left brain. And there is crossover in the brain, but she presented this concept of a dual brain, right, with the right hand being the manager of all the stream of incoming data, the sensorial data coming in, and the left being the organizer, and the right hand being the multi-processor, which we see in the female world as a you know, a characteristic, and the left-hand side being the serial processor, like the male. You know, I've got to do things in a sequence, and the right-hand side was the God side, right? Because, you know, from a meditative perspective, where you shut the thinking brain down, the left brain, the serial processor, shut it down, allow the right-hand brain to just be in the moment and sensing, right? It seems that the God is the right-hand side. And there's a great little video, if you can just hunt it down, Jill Bolte-Taylor, and have a look at that video. It's very insightful into this right-hand, left-hand notion. And it's interesting that this particular text actually reflects that. And I'll give you one other interesting insight. Leonardo da Vinci's painting, The Last Supper. Have a good hard look at that and notice that the painting's divided into left and right, basically, and the good guys, Mary's a good person, she's not a prostitute, all are on the right-hand side of Jesus. They all look in direction to him as if acknowledging him and his way. But to the left-hand side, you have two groups of three males. The first group of three males are arguing with Jesus, so they're unenlightened, they're still, you know, on the journey. But then there's three other people that are having a bloody chat amongst themselves, which is indicative that they've got their own ways. And I thought, wow, you know, and it reflected the right-left paradigm again. It put the good people on the right side and it put the others. And we know that Da Vinci was a neuroscientist, or one of the earliest neuroscientists. So very interesting stuff, that, mate. You've got a lot going on there.
Well, Rob, I have to say that although I would say that your interpretation is not wrong, it just seems to be pretty involved and very overcomplicated in a way. Because let me present to you like the basic interpretation of, say, like somebody like Dr. Price would say.
Yeah.
The thing, be in the middle, means be in the midst of the world, because we're talking from a Gnostic perspective, but walk on one side, meaning in the same way that you should not be involved in it. So if you're in the world and involved in it, you're going to lose sight of the knowledge, the Gnostic knowledge, which will set you free. But if you learn to be in the world but not participate in it, which is the metaphor of walk on one side, that's the correct way to achieve Gnostic enlightenment.
No, that would be, it's sort of close, but the true way to Gnostic enlightenment, or, well, actually any form of, the Gnosticism throws a bit of a curveball on it, but whether it's a Gnostic person, whether it's an indigenous person, the story will always be the same, whether it's Plato, right? So whatever story you come up with has to match every single observed wisdom. And the truth of the matter is that enlightenment comes when you learn, know thyself, and you know these two elements, these two survival instincts that we have that play out inside us all, and you learn the place of the intellectual, the thinking mind, and you learn how it can. So I'm sort of jumping around a lot because there's a lot going on, but fun. I'm trying to bring it to a pinpoint. And it comes back to meditation, right? Because Jesus in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, and again, got to be careful with Gnosticism because there's a lot of rubbish in there as well, but there's a reason for that as well. But anyway, you need to still the mind. Meditation is very important. So Jesus does talk about Sabbath. Sabbath was recognized in that day as rest, and it was about having a still mind. Those bathtubs up around the Essene community, they were meditation tubs. So it is very much about it's very much about a still mind governed by this innate desire to be a member of a community and love thy neighbour. So a member of the herd, recognising every other member of the herd as your equal with equal rights and responsibilities. That's the God story, and then it's compounded for us by a thing called the ego This is an innate desire to look after number one. And there's some good studies that show ego in its true form. One very good one is from a guy called Paul Pitt from Berkeley University, and it clearly shows that we have this innate quality that seeks out advantage for the self, and it's quite a powerful and subtle force, and that's a barrier to the enlightenment. And you have to deal with it, you have to understand what it is, and you have to put it in its place, and choose the other side. So instead of being a selfish bugger, you've got to choose to be a member of the community, and that's when all of the goodness starts to happen. You know, so it's up to us to bring the God to the world. It doesn't work the way the politicized story goes. I'm pretty confident about that.
I think what John's saying is that the like if you were to take our traditional understanding of Gnostic theology, living in the earth is like we're like stuck in the earth. It's a bad place, the world, and we want to get back to where we came from, which is like, you know, what do they call it, the pleroma? Is that right, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, we want to get back there. We realize that we're strangers in a strange land, as it were, and in order to get there, we have to have the secret knowledge, like, you know, because we have to get past the archons and all that. That's all part of the Gnostic theology. He's saying that, what would this saying mean in that context? Like that straight ahead Gnostic theology. Like what?
Because it seems that Rob is bringing in a lot of different philosophies and mixing it in, whereas most scholars would say that it's much more narrowly defined.
Yeah.
Well, it certainly is narrowly defined, but I'm using those to show that it's held in common. It is very narrowly defined. The best definition was, and apologies to those that hate hearing the Two Wolf story, but the best is the Two Wolf story, because you can take that story that came from the Cherokee and you can connect that back to these survival strategies that we witness right through nature. So it turns out, if you want to answer the question, what is this thing called God? Well, it's the true form of nature. The true form of nature is God.
But is the question that, are they talking about that here? It seems to me that they're saying that there is only one wolf, and that is the wolf of higher knowledge.
No.
Oh, that's my third wolf theory.
No, hey, you take your third wolf and you just no. What they said is that they spoke in duality terms, didn't they, mate? Though, or are we looking at something different? Because they did say walk in the middle. So to be in the middle, there has to be two elements. Otherwise, there's no middle.
Or it could be dialectic. I mean, dualism is very characteristic of our Western thinking, but that doesn't mean that earlier civilizations were very dualistic. They might have been only partially so.
No, when I look at, when I hear the guys in the Noahide group talk about Torah, they knew it back then. It seems to me that they're talking the same story. You see, the things that we're trying to examine and pinpoint, they're the constants. They're not the moving feast here. The only thing that's the moving feast is the descriptions and the interpretations. And every now and then we get a glimpse of the connection in those.
Well, we may be trying to do that, but were they? That's the question.
Yeah, because they faced the same dilemma. You know, they were faced by, these brutal empires that were self-serving and were a real hardship for them. They had to raise immature kids that, just like we do today, that go through puberty and, are confronted by ego issues. It's the same story that just travels through life. It's why indigenous communities had that initiation rite. It's why pyramids exist, actually, because the pharaohs lived the paradigm of that was all about the king. That's what an empire is. It's a pyramid society that's designed to serve the king. It's not the community society that you would get in a tribal model. It is the same story. I'm very confident about that.
Well, surely you could have a democracy empire.
Well, now we start to sort of try and model our societies and find a good way to model them. Well, it turns out that probably the best model, because there's three elements historically involved, right? You've got ego, you've got this thing called God, and then you've got secrecy as a part of the historical story. Why secrecy is in the mix is because corruption was in the mix. So if you want to have a decent democracy, you've got to have 5 elements, not 3. The 3 elements are valid, right? So leadership is important. You do need wise heads to guide you, because, you know, immaturity is very much a part of the story. And so you do need an executive. You do need law. I mean, we know that. We should be able to discern that, because Aboriginal communities, even after 50,000 years, still resort to some form of law or punishment for, you know, the immature acts, because there's these survival instincts, the selfish things are very strong force. So you do need law, and of course there's the people. But you need a good balance over that. So you need a structure that sort of balances those powers in a good moral sense. But on top of that, you must have a media, a 4th element, that really can be the eyes and ears and the reporter with all integrity, and that's what we don't have, because we don't have an unbiased media. You need a reporter that's going to watch the performance of the 3 elements and report accurately into a public discussion. And then you also need them to keep an eye on what's called the 5th element. So all through history you've had this, and this is where secrecy comes in. And secrecy is a bad thing, right? It's just of no value at all. Transparency is the model that Jesus subscribes to. You need the media to keep an eye on people that follow the ego path and report their activities so that they cannot escape examination. And that would be a better model than what we currently enjoy.
Well, I don't disagree with any of that, but when you say ego, like, whose theory on ego are you going by?
Well, I've lived a life, so I know a bit about my own ego, but it's the two wolf story, mate, to make it very concise and simple. The Cherokee grandfather recognized in his life experience that there were 2 wolves that had to be dealt with, and that it was up to the individual to make a choice on which path was best. And he was just saying to his grandson that you need to be aware of those things. Now, what is it? Well, it's that primitive survival strategy that favors the self. That's where ego comes from, basically.
Okay, so we're not going with like Jung's or Freud's ego. We're going with a more personally defined ego.
Yeah, well, certainly it is a personal thing.
No, I mean like you defined it personally, not really using someone else's definition.
No, I use the Cherokees, and it's what Jesus talks about. He talks about the same thing. If you can read between the lines, it's the same story. It doesn't change over time. That's what an empire is. An empire is just someone being selfish.
Yeah, but I mean, the major theories in psychology on ego have nothing to do with that. The ego is made to fulfill the desires of the self while still maintaining some sociability in the world outside of the self.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing, because what they're saying is that the intellectual mind establishes the ego identity, so the mind creates an identity that's self-serving. And what happens, where lies come from, why people actually lie, is they're conflicted between that and they want to project to the outer world the goodness, the good qualities that engender herd. and communion and community. So there's a conflict between their inner desires that are driven by this ego force, and that, you know, the other wolf that's there as well. And that's how people can be clever liars, because they're aware of both sides of the story.
Well,
but
in Freud's theory, the ego isn't the inner self. The ego is the outer self. The self is the inner self.
Yeah, but you got to know that Freud was actually an Ashkenazi Jewish person, which sort of there's a whole story to be told there, and that's part of the next book. But just tell me what he's saying again, because I haven't researched him, but I'm very dubious about.
Yeah, I already told you the part about the ego being made by the self to fulfill its desires, while still maintaining some sort of balance, or like being anchored in reality.
Yeah, I accept that as true. So what was the other one?
There's the self, which is your true self, which is all your feelings and emotions and all your wants and needs. And then you have your superego, which is the part of your brain that basically makes you feel guilty for bad things.
Oh, the guilt thing, that's that's part of the mix, all right. Absolutely, but the guilt trip is very much attached to the left brain sort of idea. That's where it sits, because in in experience, or a still mind, where the mind's still and you're just living the experience, there is no guilt. There's no such thing as guilt, and so guilt does belong to that, and they recognise this early on, these dudes, and that's why they tell those biblical stories the way they do. They cast guilt on the person, say that you're born into sin, which is not true, and they craft that story very deliberately, because they know that there's an innate potential in humans to blame themselves where blame is not warranted. Yeah. In the cold hard light of day.
If you're going to research that, I would suggest maybe just the basic research on Freud, because most modern theory on how the mind split up is more based off Jung. And he has the persona and like the shadow self and the male and female aspects of the person along with the self.
Yeah, I don't subscribe to separating it into male-female, that phenomenon, because that ego good sort of stuff goes on in males and females. It's not, and I think.
Well, no, the ego's still there. He still has the ego in his theory. He's just talking about the masculine and the feminine. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, for me personally, I'll let other people argue that. All I really want to do is. Oh, okay, John's going out for a second, he'll be back. All I really want to do is encourage the examination of the politicizing of religions. That's enough for me. Everyone else can worry about everything else. If I can get that conversation going, I'll pack my bags and just get on with life, I'm comfortable with what I've come to know as a reasonable enough explanation. It's good enough for me. It'll get me through life comfortably. I'm not scared of dying or any of that sort of stuff. So I think I've achieved what the spiritual journey is about, or at least to my satisfaction. And really, at the end of the day, that's what it's about. It's not about. It's about you coming to an understanding that gives you, gives you a sense of, yep, I get it. I know how it works. And it's not so much about, how you explain that to others. Everyone's got to find their own home base.
It would be good for you though to do some basic research, because I mean, if you ever find yourself talking to someone that has maybe a little bit more than passing education dealing with that type of thing, they might be confused in how you're using the word ego.
Oh yeah, okay, I get your point. Yeah, a matter of fitting it all in though, because my focus now is getting back to work, because we're financially that's become an issue. So I've just got to get back to work, and I have to read and study for that outcome. So I'm not sure I'll get to it. Maybe if I can convince you, Dougie, that I'm right about the biblical stuff, you can handle that part of it for me. You were quite capable, mate. Yeah. But anyway, what did you think about that, Doug? Has that got you thinking again that perhaps 160 is the date?
Well, I still see the anomalies. I don't see a resolution of the anomalies from the 42 through the 245. And I was just doing a little bit of reading about Ptolemy, and he was a political hostage essentially, and he actually, Antiochus actually didn't have any political control over Egypt or its territories at the time. He just captured Ptolemy the Sixth, and then when that happened, his brother Ptolemy the Seventh basically stepped in. I mean, because if Antiochus had had control of that region politically, there wouldn't have been a continued resistance against him from the top.
Yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying there, but if you go back to what's written in Wiki, it says that he has a victory and he installs a puppet king. So at that point, if he's in that position, he could have taken a lot of the gold and that at that particular point. And then the things that you're speaking of are secondary. And then later,
well, they're secondary, but they're salient. I mean, they're part of the.
But think about the Roman. Yeah, but think about the Roman role. The Roman role's key here because the Romans, from 188 BC, so that's 18 years. So they've got a long period. This is from the Peace of Apamea. From that period forward, the Romans are all very heavily invested in that region. Right?
Yeah, but what I'm asking for is evidence that Antiochus had political control over
the term
not just Egypt, but Libya and Ethiopia.
Antiochus allowed Ptolemy VI to continue. So this is 170 BC. He launched a preemptive strike against Egypt, conquering all but Alexandria. So there's a question mark there. And he did capture King Ptolemy. To avoid alarming, right. Antiochus allowed Ptolemy VI to continue ruling as a puppet king.
The problem is though that let's see, his brother Ptolemy the Seventh took over.
Yeah, well, that's right. I'm not disputing that. That still doesn't sort of break the, an explanation down.
Well, I don't think it settles the anomaly because I still don't see any direct evidence that Antiochus, even through a puppet king, had control over Libya and Ethiopia, because that's what Daniel's saying.
I don't know that either. So I grant you. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that.
He could have. I'm not saying he didn't. I'm just saying that.
The other thing
we need to look into this more as far as Libya and Ethiopia.
Sure.
And then there's still the obvious main anomaly, which is the attribution of Antiochus' death in Palestine. That needs an explanation, I think, as well.
You did skip over one little salient point, and that was the mention that there was a fleet involved, and in the text it talks about a fleet or ships in the Bible as well. So there is a correlation of Antiochus attacking with a fleet. So that's an interesting correlation.
But what does that have to do with the account of his death in Daniel?
Well, no, I'm just saying that there is mention historically of a fleet of ships, and that.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that. Remember, I'm saying that most of what's I'm saying that most of what Daniel records is real history.
Yes.
I'm just saying that at a certain point he starts to record non-history. I'm still not convinced that we have good historical direct evidence that he had direct political control over Egypt and Libya and Ethiopia. And remember, Daniel, the parts in Daniel is saying that he didn't have indirect control through a client king or a puppet king. It's saying that he actually marched and took them over in the same way that he did Egypt.
Yeah.
And that's not borne out historically. And then the other thing is the death of Antiochus in Palestine. I still don't think is settled.
Yeah, and I think if and when you're looking, I certainly will, keep an eye on that 45 days. That you can find anything to do with 45 days, I think that's important. There's got to be some, because the thing I hold, right, when people put pen to paper on these matters, where they're recording events that, you know, later can be validated as historic, there's a reason that they do it. So there's something about that 45-day period, which is incidentally, we can narrow it down to a time frame. It's certainly 164 BC. There's something about a 45-day event. So it'd be interesting to, you know, it'd be interesting what history holds for us about the nature and the events surrounding his death, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if we had more historical documentation detailing the specifics about his death, obviously that would be helpful. But until we have those, we just have to go off of the sources that we do have.
Yeah.
And then I still want to look more into Old Testament scholarship in regards to possible common authorship between Daniel and Jubilee, Enoch, etc., because that's an area where I'm unfortunately completely ignorant on, and want to look further into it, because it seems like you're using something from Jubilee to date Daniel.
Absolutely, yeah. The 77.
So I wanted.
77s is definitely based on the Jubilee construct.
Right. Yeah. And I'm not saying. I just don't know enough about that, and I would just want to look into it and see what the evidence is, if there is any, that there's a commonality between the authorship of the Book of Daniel and at least Book of Jubilee.
Even if there wasn't a common authorship, are they using the same systems is also a question that needs to be looked into.
Yeah, that too, yeah. For example, it's conceivable that Daniel could have been using a different calendar system or counting system compared to Jubilee. I'm not saying it is that way. I'm saying it's conceivably possible, and we would need evidence to rule one way or the other.
Yeah, that's right. And with Enoch, the telling story there, or the thing to look at, is this attempt to change the calendar from lunar to solar, or whichever way around it went. That's what one of Enoch's founding principles is, and you'll see in Enoch how the 77s, or that Jubilees method, is used in recording the events.
And Enoch?
Yeah, and Enoch is a story about re-establishing or restating the biblical history up to that point in time. Yeah. Just as Kings was a restating of the history of the kings to the time of Cyrus, before they unleashed their book of Isaiah, which again was the same thing. It was post-mortem historic events cast as prophetic propaganda. Yeah, that was good.
But you would date Isaiah much earlier than Daniel, right?
The book of Isaiah is 538 BC.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
Definitely.
I got to get up early in the morning, so I'm going to have to depart.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, and more power with your work. I think that's going to be an important work if you can get the pattern sorted, and good luck.
Yeah.
Good on you.
All right. Take care, guys.
See ya. Yeah. Well, that was a good session, Dougie. Well, that sort of saved us some time, mate, because we've now covered it. I think, haven't we?
Yep, but we have homework. I'm just hoping that there's I'm just hoping there's something out there that I mean, external to the texts themselves that, well, maybe not. That might be too much to ask for, but
well, at the end of the day, mate, you've got to deal with what you can get your hands on, and this is the power of Wikipedia. See, I've been largely criticised quite a lot for using Wikipedia as my source, but the power in it is that you can actually get through a shitload of material very quickly. And in defence of Wikipedia, it never failed the theory. The information that I was looking up, it actually helped validate the theory. So in its defense, you can't have a 900-year theory and go looking at all these episodes. If Wikipedia was such a poor source, then it would be all over the shop. It wouldn't consistently ring true so often. So
yeah, I think it's an excellent source.
I love it.
But it's not perfect, and
no, granted.
And it's not it's secondary to the primary sources, and to that extent, I think that's why the scholarly world doesn't quote unquote condone using Wikipedia as the source, because like you can look up statistics on take any particular like science or history article page on Wikipedia, and inevitably you're going to get a certain amount of errors or stuff that is outdated, stuff like that, which is fine. I mean, every encyclopedia suffers from that, and Wikipedia is not any worse than the others. So it's an excellent resource, but not perfect.
Yeah, but where it's really valuable is that it gives you that single place and it links things together. So
exactly, yeah.
You can go to like Antiochus and then you can follow the whole ruling dynasty, and then you can make connections and you can see. So that's where you get this convergence of the patterns. You can start to see the patterns. And that's really where it stands on its own, because you can do that all at the click of the mouse. You don't have to race down to the library and get the next volume.
Yeah, especially in historical ways, it's a very good survey of the field, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, you could be interested in Epiphanes, but you can also get his full context.
Yeah.
Who else was involved, and then if you see something of intrigue, like there's one there that I'm looking at the moment, it says "Line in the Sand." Well, I can click on that link, and then instantly I'm getting the deeper context of that story. And then if I want to, I can go down to the footnotes and get external sources. So
right. They'll probably go into more detail too. The citation sources.
But then too, you can just jump out into Google and throw up the line of queries. You can jump away from Wiki and look at other sources for the same story.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, I'm gonna run too, guys. That was fun though.
Yeah, mate. For me too, and I might head out too, unless someone else has got anything they want to talk about. But thanks, Doug. Much appreciated your input, and I'm gonna win this one.
Well, I'm not married to either date. I'm just trying to see where the evidence is pointing. That's all.
Yeah.
So anyway, good talking to you guys. Talk to you later.
See you, dude.
Oh, real quick, I believe the evidence points to Christopher Hitchens being a complete asshole. And I believe he would agree with me because he is an asshole.
No, that was his job.
Yeah, I know. He was a professional asshole.
Hey, Devin, how's that research going on, what's his name, Carrier's book?
Oh, yeah, I've given up on it because basically he's come to the background notion, and that's where it just starts really getting repetitious and boring for all intents and purposes.
Yeah.
But that's just me. I don't know. I'm getting to a point where all the information is just starting to blur together and just be like, okay, I've heard this before. I've heard this before. Could you tell me anything new? No? Okay, then we're moving on.
So for you, there was nothing new in Carrier's work at all?
Like I said, I stopped at around like halfway through chapter 4, so I don't really know. But it's just really getting old. I mean, there were a few things that he said I would agree with. Nothing that he says that's contentious per se, but at the same time, it's just nothing new. It's just starting to get boring as fuck, really. It's like one of those things where you just learn something for like a series of consecutive years, and you get to a point where all the information just seems that comes at you like nothing's new. So you're really so you're just getting bored with it. So I think it's about that time where I just step back and just take a bit of a break from it all, and then come back later when it feels fresh.
Yeah, okay. So have you got any conclusions of your own on the historicity?
My conclusions pretty much haven't changed since I've last changed them, and that was about like 4 years ago. And but my view so far has been that the mythicists make a case that deserves to be heard, but not all of them necessarily do. But I still hold to the to SGF Brandon's model of Jesus, being that he was a zealot of the early of the first century Jewish faction.
Yeah. So you give him a place in history then?
Yes. Although again, that will change if I get through Carrier's book. It's just I'm gonna have to take a bit of a break here because because everything's like feeling really dull and boring right now because it's all the same shit.
Yeah. I get it. All right, mate. No worries. Just curious on that. Well, I sit in the same camp. I mean, for me, he's historical. It's too close to the point in time for it to be any other way. I mean, if you're going to make someone up, it's usually a bit later down the track where you can get away with it.
Well, he seems to be getting a lot of attention per se. Although I wish he would focus more of his stuff on. Although I wish he would focus more instead of it being something along the lines of Amazon reviews and responding to people like that. I think he should focus primarily on the responses he gets from academic journals. Which he's gotten I think like 3 or 4 of them so far, so that's pretty good. At the very least, and he's gotten a couple of blogs that he's had to respond to via academics because for some weird-ass reason, academics are now taking to the internet and blogging about some of their findings as opposed to, or at the very least what they're doing is that they're responding to other academic works but not in peer review, which is kind of weird, really. I mean, why use your blog for that shit? I mean, write a paper, get it published, and then publish a little bit of a snippet in your blog. And then people will want to read the rest of the article. I mean, seriously, just do it that way.
Yeah, but maybe they're getting anxious that their previous findings might be a little suspect.
Well, not only that, it just irritates the fuck out of me that people like Erdman, for example, communicates to Carrier through a blog, and really he doesn't realize that what he's doing is that he's effectively lying to Carrier in some of his responses, like saying, "Oh, I never actually said that Murdoch made a hand drawing of a statue of Priapus. I never said that, when in fact it does. You actually accuse her." He accuses Murdoch, which of course is like not my favorite mythicist, but she does present some interesting things like the Priapus statue. He accuses her of presenting that as her own hand drawing, and then he says that the statue doesn't exist, when in fact it does. It's like the Vatican confirms it. It's actually part of the Vatican's secret vault. So not only that, the Catholic Encyclopedia also refers to it. There are other academic studies that have done on the Priapus statue that have been published. I mean, you know, she even tells you exactly where the fuck she gets it from. But yet, for some weird, strange reason, Irvin has the goal to say, "Oh, I didn't actually make the claim that you fabricated it, even though you did." But anyways, looks like there's another. Let's migrate over to here so we can continue this. There's a link in the chat there, just so you know.
That's from Reuben, or?
Yeah, it's from Reuben. It's on the next Google Hangout. He's saying migrate over to there.
Oh, okay. He wants us to go there. Okay, I get it. Yeah.